Now that John Kerry has officially started his new gig as Secretary of State, the question of who is going to run to replace him in the Senate is getting weird. We know on the Democrat side that Congressman Ed Markey and Congressman Stephen Lynch are both running. They will be in a Democratic primary against each other on April 30th, if everything goes as expected. But on the Republican side, the list of would-be candidates seems to be getting smaller and smaller every day. Last week, in a surprise move, of course, former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown announced via text message that he would not be running for the seat. That prompted Jed Lewison and the merry liberal pranksters at Daily Kos to start a campaign to draft Mitt Romney to run for that seat. Quote, with Brown out in Massachusetts, we must draft Mitt Romney for U.S. Senate. Draft Mitt. No deferments this time. Then, much to the surprise and delight of the already delighted folks at Daily Kos, then came reports that not Mitt, but some other Romney was seriously considering running. The news came from the Boston Herald, which claimed to have learned that Tag Romney was considering running for the seat, now that Scott Brown had opted out. And that was on top of the Herald's weekend reporting that Republicans were actually urging Tag's mom to run, and Romney for Senate. So, yeah, we know that Mitt Romney lost by 23 points in this one of his home states, but maybe he was just the wrong Romney. Republicans in Massachusetts just itching to get a Romney, some Romney, any Romney back on the ballot this year. 23 points. But almost as quickly as the Ann or Tag Romney excitement had built up, it started to crumble. And by this afternoon, Tag Romney himself announced in complete sentences with full, real, actual words that he is not going to run for that seat. And I don't think Ann Romney's going to run either. And that leaves Massachusetts Republicans in a tough spot. No Scott Brown, no unspecified member of the Romney family. Right now, the surest thing that Massachusetts Republicans have is Dr. Keith Ablow, a Fox News expert on psychiatry. He recently co-wrote a book with Glenn Beck. He announced today that he will totally run for the Senate in that special election as long as Massachusetts Republicans unify around him and nominate him with no primary. What could possibly go wrong? That seems like a foolproof idea. Did I mention he co-wrote a book with Glenn Beck? But it's not just in Massachusetts that Republicans are having trouble coming up with candidates for the U.S. Senate. In the great state of Iowa, Democratic Senator Tom Harkin has announced that he's retiring at the end of this term, which means his seat will be up for grabs in 2014. And the really interesting thing is the polling on this race. When you poll just Iowa Republicans, just likely Republican midterm voters, they want this guy. They want Tea Party birther guy Steve King. Steve King polls way ahead of his next closest primary challenger, the more moderate Republican Congressman Tom Latham. Steve King ahead by 17 points in that Republican primary matchup when you look at the polls. Of course, when you put Steve King up against the likely winner of the Democratic primary, and you actually poll the whole state, all likely midterm voters in Iowa, Steve King, the Tea Party birther guy, loses to Democratic Congressman Bruce Braley. But just counterfactual here, let's say the wacky Tea Party guy, the birther Steve King guy, didn't run off with the primary. Look what happens when you poll statewide among likely voters and you ask them to choose between the not Steve King guy and the Democrat. Actually, the Republican guy wins. In other words, the whole state of Iowa would rather have the more moderate Republican guy. But if you do not give them that choice in the general election, if Republicans decide that what they're offering is just the birther guy, just the wingnut Tea Party guy, and a Democrat, Iowa's going to pick the Democrat. The Republican who polls show will lose to Steve King in the primary is, at least right now, the Republican who might have a shot in the general. Which is to say, Steve King is already poised to become the next Sharon Engel, Christine O'Donnell, Ken Buck, Todd Akin, Richard Murdoch of the Republican Party. Which is also to say, this is turning out to be kind of a long-standing problem for Republicans all over the country. Candidates who can win Republican primaries are not the same thing as candidates who can win general elections. Those two circles do not overlap. Now, this guy, Karl Rove, has decided he's going to try to cure the Republican Party of this particular disease. The Karl Rove-backed super PAC, American Crossroads, has formed a group called Conservative Victory Project, described as a way to fight back against the Tea Party groups that have helped elevate candidates who ultimately lose their seats to Democrats in real general elections. The New York Times reporting, quote, the group's plans call for hard-edge campaign tactics, including TV ads against candidates whom party leaders see as unelectable and a drag on the efforts to win the Senate. One of the group's founders homing in on that upcoming Iowa Senate race as an example, quote, we're concerned about Steve King's Todd Aiken problem. This is an example of candidate discipline and how it would play in a general election. All of the things he has said are going to be hung around his neck. This new plan to fight to keep the kookier Republican candidates out of the general election is not going over well on the right. Jim DeMint's Tea Party Senate campaign group, for one, they are outraged. They tell Roll Call newspaper, quote, "This is a continuation of the establishment's effort to avoid blame for their horrible performance in the 2012 elections. Now they want to use this new PAC to trick donors into giving them more money so they can lose more races." Also, the Club for Growth, remember them? They are pointing to the electorally successful Tea Party insurgents of the recent past. They're telling Politico, quote, "They are welcome to support the likes of Arlen Specter, Charlie Crist, and David Dewhurst. We will continue to proudly support the likes of Pat Toomey, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz." Freedom Works compares these new developments to everything from the Star Wars empire to the dystopia imagined by George Orwell. They say the empire is striking back. The empire is striking back. An Orwellian named Conservative Victory Project is created with the sole operating mission of blocking the efforts of fiscally conservative activists across the country. These blatant acts of hostility are typical behavior of an entrenched political establishment circling the wagons around incumbents, regardless of job performance in office. Biggest problem for the Republican Party might be right now that these guys kind of have a point. And yes, Republicans have a very real, very identifiable problem with their primaries, turning out candidates that cannot get elected in general elections. This is a pattern. This is a 3-election cycle pattern now for the U.S. Senate. But Karl Rove Super PAC, the same folks who are starting this new Conservative Victory Project to start winning races again, those guys got a whopping 1.29% return on their investment in the last campaign. They spent over $100 million, and almost all of it went to races that they lost. So it's not like they're the geniuses here. Remember, they're the geniuses who supported Mitt Romney and thought he would win, and were shocked that he didn't, to the point of making that nice lady from Fox News go down to the decision desk and fight with those statisticians. It was so embarrassing. The question is now not only which side is going to win this big intra-party fight, but also what will that mean for the future of the party? Which side really has the potential to fix what's wrong? The great Frank Rich joins us next. Stay with us.